have absolutely outstanding entrepreneur here today with us. I'm very grateful for him to have agreed to take this time out. Dr. Dembo. Dr. Dembo is one of the world's leading authorities in risk management. He's also the founder and CEO of Zerofootprint, a clean tech software and services company that makes environmental impact measurable, visible, and manageable for corporations, government institutions, and individuals. Zero-footprint solutions mitigate environmental risk and drive cost reductions through behavioral changes. Ron is also founder and former CEO of Algorithms Incorporated, growing it from startup to the world's largest enterprise risk management software company, with offices in 15 different countries, over 70% of the world's top 100 banks as clients, and consistent recognition as one of the Canada's 50 best managed companies. Prior to this, he had a distinguished 10-year academic career at Yale University. He currently sits on a number of boards and is a member of Climate Change Adaptation Advisory Committee, Canada, and was appointed to the steering committee of the World Urban Campaign coordinated by the UN at the time. Without further ado, please help me welcome Ron.
Thank you, Lily, for inviting us here. I'm not sure how to start all of this, but I'm going to give you a story which might sound very contradictory to what you hear. It's not truly, and that's the interesting part would be finding what I'm going to tell you and how it relates to what you just heard. So I'm going to tell you about Algorithmics, the first company I started. And essentially, I'm an academic by training, and I never thought I'd be anything but an academic. I was teaching at Yale, and one day someone walked into my office and said, you know, you should take, while you're consulting to engineering companies, you should go and consult to Goldman Sachs. I mean, you'll earn a lot more money for doing the same thing. So I went to Goldman Sachs, got a job there for the summer. This was 1986. And I was there only 6 weeks. And the person who was running Goldman Sachs at the time was a guy called Friedman and a guy called Rubin. It was a co-managed company. Rubin went on to be the Secretary of the Treasury of the United States. And one day they called me in. It was a very entrepreneurial place at the time. There were about 6,000 people, but talk about entrepreneurs, these were really entrepreneurs. And it was a very flat organization. So one day they walked into my office. And you know, I'm sitting there, it's a great job. You know, at Yale I'm earning what I earn in a year at Yale, I'm earning in a month at Goldman Sachs. And I'm actually, they said to me, just do what you like. So one day they walk into my office and say, you know, they've got a real problem. They've gone to a whole lot of academics, they've tried a whole lot of things, and they just don't know what to do about it. It had to do with mortgage-backed securities and how they settle. So I said, I'll tell you what, give me a day and I'll come back to you, and this is an idea. So I came back to them a day later, this is to Rubin, and I said, if you give me $1 million in 7 months, I think I could save you $15 million next year. And he turned around to me, just looked at me in the eye and said, okay. And I thought, you know, that was to me one of the most entrepreneurial moments I've ever seen. It turned out that we didn't use $1 million, so it cost something like $500,000, and we didn't save $15 million, we saved $8 million. But it became so good, all of a sudden all other investment banks were trying to find out what Goldman Sachs was doing, because it was, you know, cleaning up on the settlement of mortgage-backed security. But it sticks in my mind. It was a really big entrepreneurial moment. Another big entrepreneurial moment was I had to leave Goldman Sachs to come back to Canada. You know, they offered me a job there, by the way, just after 6 weeks. They said, would you like to get head of technology? I said, sorry, I can't. I've got, daughter is moving up to Toronto and I have to go and be with her. So they said, no, that's okay. Work 4 days a week. Work wherever you like. Just, don't worry. So I said, no, I can't do it. So anyway, I came back to Canada. I was going back to Canada, and it was a Friday afternoon, and about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I realized, oh my God, I'm going back to Canada tomorrow, and I don't have a visa. I'm not a land immigrant. I'm a nothing, actually. I'm a US citizen at the time. And I wouldn't be allowed in. I mean, I can go for a holiday, but I want to go back to work, it's a problem. So I called up the Canadian embassy, and I say to them, how long are you open? I said, at 4:30 we close. I rush over, I get there at 4:20, and I go into one of those little cubicles, I sit in front of the guy, I said, look, I was once a land immigrant many years ago. I've just been teaching at Yale for 10 years. I'm an okay guy, but in the end, and restore my land immigrant status. And the guy looks at me in the eye and he says, okay, just give me a few minutes. Goes around to the back, comes back with the land of immigrants. He's up. And I thought, whoa, that's entrepreneurial. Because basically he took a risk on me, a calculated risk. But it turned out to be a good risk because the company I came back and ended up founding brought about $2 billion into the Canadian economy before I sold it. So it was a good bet. But it struck me, these were people making decisions under uncertainty, under extreme uncertainty, because they didn't have that much information on me. And they took a bet. And being an entrepreneur is about taking decisions under extreme uncertainty and taking bets. Everything's a bet. So one of the other stories that was really, I'm not sure how this fits in with what we've heard up to now, but essentially, I never had a business plan ever in algorithms. I started it in my backyard. Single person. I started it by doing consulting and taking a retainer I had in consulting and hired my first person. We were about 60 million in revenue before we raised any capital. And never had a business plan. You might say, whoa, how does that fit? Well, it was a group of very passionate people with a very, very, very clear idea of what they wanted to do. And that's what I found to be most important, is having a very clear idea of what you want to do and having the ability to get there in ways that are seemingly as if you don't know what you're doing. For example, let's imagine I want to get there to that wall, but as I go there, I find a force field over here that sort of prevents me from getting there, and I go around it. But I'm still aiming at that wall. And then I find another force field, and I go around that. So it looks like I'm doing this to get there. That's where I wanted to go. So I started with a simple idea. At Goldman Sachs, one of the best investment banks in the world, there was no way at that time to measure the risk of the entire enterprise. And I said, as a mathematician, this is kind of stupid. Surely if you combine the portfolios of the fixed income with the mortgage-backed people, you can get an economy of scale and actually offsetting. And you'll get a more efficient view of risk. In those days, risk was defined as the guy who sat next to you, the techie who sat next to you at the trading table and calculated the first derivative of the direction that you're going in. So we set out to change the way people look at risk. Now that was naive, extremely naive. I mean, had I known what I need to do to get there, that I would need 300 programmers sitting in a building and, 20 highly paid salesmen and 80 financial engineers with PhDs and so on, and a budget of $80 million for salaries, I would not have actually tried to do it. And it was just this naive idea, well, this is obvious, you could actually build, we should be building an enterprise risk system that can actually aggregate all of this. There's got to be a way to do it. So I started with that idea, but I got a little distracted along the way, and that was the first force field. In doodling with the math that I was doing, I discovered and patented, which was one of the first patents of its kind. It's actually one of the first financial engineering patents. I discovered a way to build portfolios in a way that could create hedges for very complex portfolios. So in other words, the hedge is simply, here I've got a portfolio, it's a bunch of stocks or whatever, bonds. And can I find something else that behaves exactly like that, made of different securities, in a random world? That's what portfolio replication is. And I built an algorithm to do that and patented it. And that became what we wanted to do. So it was an optimization algorithm. That was part of the research I did at Yale. And I went out trying to sell that. And it turned out in the mathematical model, there was a matrix buried somewhere there. And I just did the assumption, finance people know what they're doing. They've been studying this for years. That matrix must just be available. It's just, the matrix was really the value of a security, an entry in the matrix, the value of a security under a scenario. You think that, well, I should be able to get that data pretty easily. Turns out that that was not true. So that one of the things I needed for that optimization model, that matrix, turned out to be the company that I built, which was actually building that matrix. And it was called risk management. And that came to me somewhere about a year and a half after doing this. The first bit of money we made was actually building that model in a spreadsheet, going to the Royal Bank and RBC Dominion and saying, you know what, Bankers Trust is just coming to Toronto and selling securities, making 300 basis points, that's 3% on every transaction, which is humongous for those kind of securities. And I can show you how to do it, but I want a piece of the action. And we managed to convince them to do this. I remember standing in front of the committee, it was all of the guys managing the Royal Bank, RBC Dominion, and the head of that committee, the CEO, said to me, what would happen if this was actually a hedge, it was an instrument that would, it was called a put option on the Nikkei. It doesn't matter if you don't know what a put option on the Nikkei. Nikkei is the Japanese index. The index had been rising. It was at almost 40,000 at that time. To give you a perspective, it's about 13,000 now. And it was a week before the crash that RBC Dominion sold to the market a put option. Now, a put option, if the market goes down, you are going to lose if you sell it. If you bought that, you're going to make money because you actually bought stuff that's going to go south, and you bought a hedge against that. So anyway, he asked me the question, what would happen if the Nikkei market went to zero? And Japan at that stage was the darling of the world. It had the biggest economy, best car manufacturers, best TV manufacturers, whatever. And I said, you know what would happen? That Toronto would sink into the ground because, if their economy goes to zero, we're all going to zero. So that was a facetious answer. But I said, you know what? We've hedged this so that if it drops to 16,000, it'll be okay. And let me show you how, and we showed them how. And they actually took the risk. Believe it or not, they did it. And we took a very small percentage of the deal. And what was supposed to be something worth a few $30,000, $40,000 to us, earned us $1 million in 2 months. And with that money, I actually started algorithms. I really started hiring algorithms. So here's what went wrong. First thing that went wrong. I was working with 1 or 2 little programmers, very cheap, straight out of school, and I went to say, I'm going to hire a really good team. I'm going to hire, out of AES, a very well-known computing company at the time, hire the chief technology officer. He brings in a whole team, and we start building the real stuff. A year later, after not being able to deliver anything to anybody with this team, and discovering that my disk drive costs are largely due to downloading pornography, I fired the whole team. But in between, I did something interesting. It was clear that this team was not delivering and could not deliver. And so I went out and hired 2 programmers, 2 very junior programmers, and I sat with them and worked on what I would call a hedge. And the reason I'm telling you this story is because this is a fundamental thing. There's a mathematical theorem, a mathematical way of looking at this, that if you're looking at a problem that's very, very uncertain, you're building a product that you don't know what it's going to sell for, you don't know who's going to buy it, you don't know if it's even going to work, and so on. That's what's called a very random world. I'm going to show you in the talk, this is a talk I gave at TED, why the optimal solution in such a world is to hedge. So we should have been hedging anyway, but I did it naturally. A lot of people do this. It's essentially don't put all your eggs in one basket. And I had a very expensive basket costing me about $1 million a year. And I had 2 programmers costing me in total something like $50,000. They were very young guys. And what they built me created the company that actually, when I sold it, I had revenue of $130 million. It was the largest private software company at the time. So it's really interesting. I had to fire the development team and all those experts and build something. Eventually the hedge became the product. So I'm going to tell you something about risk thinking. The one thing is for sure, no matter what you do as an entrepreneur, if you're really building something new, you're in an uncertain world. But how uncertain really makes a difference? So let me give you an example. If I'm building a new Shoppers Drug Mart, or a new pharmacy, I want to put it on the corner of College and Spadina, or one just open. Well, there's thousands of examples. In fact, 485 Shoppers Drug Mart stores that you go and visit. And, you know, there's some variance amongst them and other drugstores, but for the most part, it's, you know, just a slightly better mousetrap. In other words, that's a fairly deterministic world. Very little randomness. You may have better tweaks. You may have put food in your store that's selling cosmetics, but long and short of it, we know how to build a pharmacy. But if I told you you're going to build a new wave generating system that's going to generate electricity, you know, in a renewable way from waves, and 5% of your product is actually going to be given as, you know, a charity or social good. That's a pretty random problem. You don't know who's going to buy that thing. You don't know if it works. There's no examples of wave systems that are commercial, and so on. And often we're in that category when we're building stuff. When I started Algorithmics, the vision we had, when we went into a bank to sell what we wanted to sell, and I can tell you the stories of local banks, when we went to the bank, they would say, well, why would you need this? Okay. And so we were selling something that hadn't existed before. And so there were no comparable models. Now you often find yourself in that position. So these are what mathematicians call deterministic and stochastic worlds. Deterministic world is a world where most of the data is known with certainty. And the stochastic world is just the opposite, where everything's uncertain. And every problem you're going to see as an entrepreneur is a mixture of those two. And how deterministic it is and how stochastic it is will determine the nature of the solution that you have to follow. And this is not well understood or taught. If you look at the books Good to Great and all of those kind of books, the management books, they're about execution, they're about the deterministic world. They essentially assume you know the data and you have to hire the right people and you have to build the right HR teams and so on. And business plans work very well in the deterministic world. Whereas you know, stochastic world is one that's more suited to the kind of sheets that we're talking about. So here's an example. For sure, there will be a terrorist attack in India. I can tell you that. That's deterministic. But what I can't tell you is where and when. That's stochastic. So keep this in mind now. So the nature of the solution will really differ. If it's deterministic, it's all about execution. And if it's stochastic, it's all about how you hedge. So let me give you two models of airport security. There's the US model, widely adopted, where you get grade 3 trained people with a notebook and where they can tick off items and they check your shoes, they check, you have to take off your belt and they put you through. And they've got a deterministic solution to what is a fundamentally stochastic problem. If I have to tick off boxes, that's deterministic. That's a rule-based system. But what's stochastic about this? We don't know what the next terrorist will look like. Whether there'll be a guy in a boss suit wearing a tie, traveling in business class, or our classical, stereotypical terrorist. We don't know. Will it be in his tie and his shoes? So let's assume it's in his tie. The next rule that will come out there is no ties. You have to take your tie off when you go through. In his ballpoint pen, well, we're going to have to take a ball pen. And pretty soon in this cafe's world, you'll get so many rules that you won't be able to get through. And that's unsustainable. It will not last for long. Then there's the Israeli system, which actually grew out of some real terrorist attacks, which is completely different, which assumes that we don't know where the next terrorist will come from. So no rules will catch it. So that, I walked into Munich airport, where it's really, really a lot of security, to fly El Al to Israel. And that's, you think we go through security. And the way it's done there is, and it's, I actually had a pocket knife in my bag, at the time. They examine you and your body language as you walk into the airport. People looking at you on TV. When you get in and you stand in the line, the security guy is actually a PhD in psychology. And he asks you questions, he's shrinking you out. And he makes a value judgment. It's like the guy who let me into Canada with a visa. He looked at me, and he was an intelligent guy, and he said, this is a good risk. If he would have gone through all the rules, I would have sat in Buffalo and I would have had to go back and forth to Buffalo many times, and it would have taken me 2 years to get my land immigrant service back, and meanwhile, I would have given up. So this is a solution, at least, that fits the problem. Whether it's the right solution or not, we can't tell, and that's the entrepreneur. So I'll give you another example. Here's another entrepreneurial venture. It's 1991. And in walks this little geeky tech guy to a board meeting in Tokyo. And somehow he got onto this meeting, and the board was sort of sitting there bored and saying, well, why is this guy here? He's proposing this strange-looking car called Prius and hybrid. Meanwhile, dollars of gas is $1 a gallon, and I should be building SUVs because they're selling like crazy. That's where all the money is in the States. So the board listens to him, and his argument is something like this. Look, it's true that gas is cheap, and it's true that you can't make an economic argument for hybrid. But one day gas will be expensive. It's not always going to be cheap. It's a commodity. There's demand in it. And it's not a huge deal. It's about $1 billion to build a car like that. In Toyota, that's not a lot of money. So they give him the go-ahead. The downside is they will have learned a little about electric cars, and this will never sell. The upside is it will sell, and they will own the market. Meanwhile, simultaneously in Detroit, there's a board meeting, and in walks this geeky engineer, and he says, I've got a really good idea. It's this car called the EV1. I think electric cars are going to come back. And there's going to be a day when we won't be able to sell these big SUVs because gas will be so expensive and so on. And we've got a couple of these cars on the road in California, and people love them. They won't let them go. And a guy gets up at the board and he says, "Kill it," and they kill it. And guess who killed the electric car? And guess who suffered because of it? So what was this? In the first case, Toyota's solution had the form of a hedge. We're not going to give up on making SUVs, but we're going to put a little bit of money into hybrids. So to a stochastic problem, that's at least the right form of solution as a hedge. And General Motors' solution was kill it. That's a deterministic solution, kill it, to what is a fundamentally stochastic problem. So let me show you this in terms of climate change. Well, what's for absolute sure, this has a lot more to do with zero footprint, is that carbon in the atmosphere is at levels that are higher than in the last million years. That is a scientific fact. I won't argue with that. What is not sure is what the effect of that CO2 concentration will be. We do know it's going to warm up the world, but do we know that we're going to hell because of it? Is it going to be worse for us? How's it going to manifest itself? And so on. Well, I tell you how it's going to manifest itself. The world's going to be more volatile. And so what we're going to need is more hedging. So when we talk about should you build renewable energy, and if so, should it be hydro, should it be solar, should it be wind, should it be geothermal? The answer is simply, we don't know what the world's going to be like, so we should hedge. And hedging means what proportion do I put into each of these, not should I kill it. So in Germany, they killed nuclear. And guess what's going to happen in Germany? They're going to buy coal-fired electricity from Poland. So how much better will the world be? Anyway, so the question on nuclear or no nuclear is the wrong question. It's how much nuclear. What if we discover fantastic ways to get rid of nuclear waste? And we in Canada haven't actually developed nuclear for a long, long time. We'll look silly. We'll look like the Prius and the EV one. So just to, let's make it simple. The simple problem is the solution of where do you put nuclear waste. Well, I can tell you the entire, France is almost entirely nuclear, and the entire nuclear waste from France fits in a Volkswagen in 1 year of generation. And they bury it. The annual waste for US coal, each city in the US digs more than one of those mountains every year. So it's not a case of whether, but how much. When we decided to get rid of coal, which is a good idea, I think, get rid of coal, we made a statement. The Premier at the time made a statement, we will get rid of coal by 2003. That's a deterministic statement to what is a random problem. And he was looking for trouble, which he had, because he couldn't get rid of it by 2002. And now, even to this day, we have gotten rid of coal. But on a bad day, we're buying electricity from Ohio, from coal-fired generators. And when the wind blows up from Ohio, we have smog. Let me tell you about Katrina and George. Katrina was a hurricane, and this was a few days before Katrina hit New Orleans. What we knew at that stage was 99.9% sure it's going to hit New Orleans or close. And you're sitting in the White House with George Bush, and the question is, should we send in the National Guard? That was the question they were looking at. Now, think of that question. That question is a deterministic question. Should I send them in or not? The right question is, how many should I send in? What edge should I have? So if you might know nothing about hurricanes, but knowing that there's randomness here, that the levees may or may not break, if you don't know. Knowing that there's randomness in the system, would tell you that the nature of the solution should look like a gate. And even not knowing anything about cars, if you're sitting on that board, you should know that when someone says kill it, they've got a solution that's fundamentally wrong. So George said no guards, and guess what happened? It's not very good. So as an entrepreneur, you're going to deal with uncertain risks, and often that means hedging. And you should know that that's good. Often I used to get chided for, how come you're doing this and that? A very good story I have, I always tell this one. 80% of our revenue was coming from ABN AMRO Bank, one stage. And we were building an enterprise risk system for their equity trading desk. It's January 28th, and in walks this very tall Dutch guy, he's taller than me. Says to me, you know, we've changed our minds. It's going to be for the fixed income desk, and we have to have it delivered March 1st. So I looked at him and said, you know, that's physically impossible. If you gave Bill Gates $10 billion and said, Bill, you know, a derivative system at that time, you couldn't do it. It doesn't matter, we'll take care of it. You know, this is not cheap. It landed up that I fired this client, something I've ever done this in my life, and I wouldn't recommend this. But it actually, I had to get rid of this client, and he was 80% of my revenue. But I had a hedge in place. And he would always come to me and say, why have you got, he said, why are you doing these other things? You should just work with us, we'll get you famous. The hedge was a Mexican bank that I had those two cheap programmers working on. And I would go back and forth between the Mexican bank, and we'd do a little version of an update, we'd show you and come back, and we'd go back and forth, reiterating the solution. So I fired this Dutch bank, and they call me into a meeting. I fly over there with a lawyer, and he stands over me like this and said, you will never sell another piece of software here, as long as I live. Unquote. And I mean, a very influential bank, banker. Turned out, by the way, that 2 years later, he was in court with his boss for illegal trading. And he went to jail and algorithmic strife. But if you look at the curve of algorithmics, that's where we took off. At that point, 2 weeks after he fired, we had this conversation, I signed a deal with this Mexican bank for $2 million, and we were off to the races, and we were not hamstrung by a client that was killing us. So I mean, it's to tell you that sometimes you get into really tough situations where the decisions are, that's suicide. How can you do that? Why do it? This company has actually morphed in a number of ways over time. So it's kind of, our goal has always been around engaging millions of people to reduce by small amounts their footprints so that the world can get much better. It's a little broader than that, but just to make it simple. So it's still that. And I've got a very interesting document I wrote before I even called it Zerofootprint. It started actually at a TED conference. And I don't have time to tell that story, but another day. And I've got the original thing I wrote, which I went around to people to sell the idea to. My first sales were to assemble a board of advisors of very, very well-known people. And I did this with the document, and that document is still that same vision as we have today. But over time, we've changed. We started as a not-for-profit, we did a lot of good, we brought a lot of stuff to Canada. People had never heard of geothermal energy. When we first started, we got geothermal energy into the mainstream. People had never heard of carbon footprints, offsetting, and so on. But it was not a sustainable operation. The idea was ultimately that we would sell and fund it, the not-for-profit, the for-profit, and it didn't work. People were very confused. Yeah, not-for-profit, but you're selling stuff. Today it's a little easier. You hear not-for-profit, you have for-profit. Anyway, so this is what our website says today. This is what we sell. And we have morphed into, from and by the way, when we do that, we give you rewards and all that, to something that's happened very recently, where we took the decision to completely invert the story of the company without inverting the technology. So essentially now we're positioning the company as a rewards company. Think of air miles. Air miles for good. So for real good. No greenwashing. And our target is you. What we call the Generation Me. You know, Generation Me is about people who have a life. And they deal with all sorts of organizations. I shop at Blood Laws, but I get money to United Way. My job's at RBC, but I still have an American Express card, and so on. And I like Android, and I'm sorry if you like iOS. That's the way I want my news delivered on Android. So Generation Me is an internet generation that's used to getting stuff the way they want it. Nothing selfish about this. This is an empowered generation. I mean, this is a generation that can do a lot of things, you know, sitting in a little cubicle with a very powerful internet. So we've had to, what we did was, this is the inversion of the story, because we had built an enormous infrastructure of enterprise software for measuring and managing risk for large, complex corporations. And today, we don't talk about that software. We talk about the rewards and the reward structure that you need to get good engagement. So what we're solving is a problem that's still very difficult, still unsolved, and we're still banging our head against the wall. Maybe we won't make it in this. But how do you engage, you know, the whole of North America, or the whole of Europe, or the whole of India for that matter? How do you engage millions and millions of people to do good? That's sort of a shorthand for to be sustainable. And we're actually getting a lot more luck with this. All of a sudden our story is much easier. It was very hard to tell our story before because you'd have to explain, well, you know, you need to measure your footprint because of this, and well, it's good if you'd have to go through a long story. Now it's pretty simple. You know, air miles? Yeah. We're like air miles, except it's for social good. When you issue points in our system, the social good has occurred measurably. It's evidence-based. And when you redeem those points, the social good occurs again. So we are social good end to end. An example of a social good. Turns out that if every Canadian walked 30 minutes a day, our health bill would drop dramatically. We know this. There's a lot of research on it. You think, well, that's a simple problem. Why don't we get everyone in Canada to walk 30 minutes a day? And that's really simple. You can describe the problem really easily. We've got tons of research to back it up. Why don't we do it? Why do we spend 50% of our tax dollars on health in Ontario, and yet we've got no engagement program around making people walk 30 minutes a day? That sounds kind of silly. So this is the entrepreneur in me saying, that's what I'm going to attack. And how I attack it is where the force field is. I've decided that it's a lot easier to attack it by becoming a rewards company than by talking about being a software company for good. It's easy to explain what we do. You know, we issue rewards when a good has occurred. Now, who's going to pay for that? Well, I can tell you who'll pay for that. You know, Green Shield stands to make have a much better business, be more profitable, and deal with an aging demography if we were to do this, save my health. Sunnybrook's heart unit fixes you when you go in there with a heart attack. You go back home, and if you don't measure your blood pressure and do the right things, you're going to be back in there soon, and it's going to cost twice as much, and the rate of success will be lower. So the simplest things, like getting diabetics to measure their insulin regularly and rewarding it. People need rewards. What we've discovered the hard way is for people to engage on an ongoing basis, they need rewards. So we've launched this now, and we're actually right at the stage. We are an absolute startup. at this stage. Become a startup again. We're a startup rewards company. It turns out that we've got a lot of collateral and we've got a brand and so on, which helps. But we're going out to large organizations and getting them as coalition partners. So, you know, if I buy organic food in Loblaws, I think that is a social good. The world's getting better when I buy organic food. If I save money driving my car and save gas, I think that is a social good. If I reduce my energy consumption, I think that is a social good. But what's good about that is Toronto Hydro might be paying me through the grant from the government, but I can spend that in Loblaws. And Loblaws might be rewarding me, and I can use it to buy an eco holiday. So that's what's called a coalition program. And this is what we are today. So it would be fun is to tell you how we got there. We're solving this problem, which is engagement, which we think of as a big untapped resource. There's a mine out there. I mean, we were just looking at these buildings. There's a LEED Gold building. I don't know if any of you know about LEED. It's a classic standard for the TED Gold building. I bring you to look at the number of floors that are lit that are empty right now. And that's supposed to be an eco-friendly building. Because people have been engaged. This is the engagement portal. And you're going to see lots of this, I hope. Okay, thank you.
Any questions?
Yeah.
You said that you started the first iteration in 2005 for 8 years, 9 years. You all, what was the,
Trajectory?
yeah, so you had a lot of zigzagging going on in the.
Yeah, but we were pretty successful in the beginning. We engaged quite a few cities. We managed to incubate a bunch of geothermal companies. We were pretty successful and we actually earned money. But I felt it was a non-sustainable. I'm not good at going out and begging for money or raising money. It's just not my style. So it just was always confusing whenever we go and try and do some activity which involved earning some money. They always expected us to be funded by someone else and get our stuff for free. So it just didn't. At that time, had I thought of where we are today, I could have given. I mean, this software will be free. We make money on points. So we can go and implement this at Mars, for example, as a reward scheme for free. Our business model is we make money on points. And we just signed up 3 different small NGOs to do this. We just started the process. But yesterday I had a talk with number 3 guy at Oracle about this. And you know, we're looking for those big partners. I should mention one other thing. It's the one thing that's really toughest in this country. The key to success as an entrepreneurial venture is finding the first right customer. Those customers make you. And typically, in many cases, in the countries that really do this successfully, the United States, for example, that customer is government or someone who's got, you know, got the ability to absorb that risk. And we are very poor at buying our own products. I had sold almost 50% of the top 100 banks in the world before I got one Canadian bank client. Then we got all of them. So this is a challenge for you. Finding that right customer is really key. And we're looking for that right customer. We're looking for them, but it's basically not, it's not restricted to Canada.
I can see that you're taking it from the corporate level to the grassroots level to the individuals, so that they can become members and then collect points and then redeem those points. What kind of social media are you using? That's number one question. And the number two question is, what are the opportunities for an individual like me who has, some idea of taking it to grassroots level in a niche market or on mainstream?
I mean, our business model is not to go directly to the consumer. It's to go to people who have networks of consumers. So we go to people who can get this out to a network, to their network. The social media is actually pretty interesting. We give rewards for people who spread the word. So you get rewards just for spreading a good word, a word about a good product or a good social company or good social. The other thing that's unique here is we've made and this is not based on market research, this is based on intuition. We made the decision that if you really want to engage someone, if I want to engage you around reducing your energy in your home, that's just a piece of you. If you work for me, I'm the Royal Bank, you work for me, I don't own your life. I used to think that, and I used to probably be partially correct. Today, I'm just a piece of your life. And so if I want to engage you, I need to engage you in a more holistic way. It's not just about what you do at the Royal Bank, it's what you do at home, in school, and the kids, and so on. So that's why we've taken this tack, which is to say, you are the center of what we're looking at. You, the individual, we get to you via your network. So it's either your health insurer, your bank, your society, so on. So we're working with some very big institutions, and hopefully we will get them as reward partners. It's really, this is probably our first week of doing this. Got me right at the beginning.
Is there a recognition component to this at all? I know people like to be rewarded, but we also like the competition and letting our friends know what good we've done.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It turns out that with rewards, that no one size fits all. That's social science. If you look at social science, pretty clear. There's different demographics and different groups that are rewarded differently. So recognition is a huge part of it. I mean, recognition is probably the one thing that carries through all demographics, from kids to investment bankers. So what the recognition is, of course, but recognition is actually a key component. So yes, there is. One of the things that we're doing with this, I want to throw this idea out to you, see what you think of it. One of the key markets that we've identified is, these big run for the cures or ride for cancer. So think of it. Today you have run for the cure, and you got to put on a pink T-shirt and go down the Don Valley and run, and that's how you can do run for the cure. And you raise money. It's a good thing. But what if I'm in Halifax and I want to run for the cure for CIBC in Toronto? Why couldn't I do that virtually? Put on my Nike band, and you measure me, and I can run X miles in X days, and I'm a part of Run for the Cure. So all of a sudden we can leverage those activities dramatically, and you reward me for doing it. So my sponsors, the sponsors of Run for the Cure, pay for those rewards, but I raise a lot of money doing it. A social good occurs on the issuance of those rewards. When those rewards accumulate, they're cashed in for carbon neutral flight. So that's the kind of vision. When we think of that as a market, turns out there's Run for the Cure, Ride for MS, there's 1 million of it. And we think we could leverage those charities. So this could be used for leveraging charity. Yeah? Sorry, there was a question down there.
Yeah, I had a question on quantification of good. I mean, this is in the Indian philosophy, it's like karma, you know, you do good and you balance it out. And sometimes, I guess, in this kind of system, the number of reward points you get for doing something. Is there like a, what's your thinking on how do you quantify the benefit if you want?
It's a very good question, actually. I don't think I have a good answer to that. But I can tell you it's more or less, we know, and the rewards companies know more or less how many rewards you need to give someone to get them back. So Air Miles knows that if you get, I don't know, 10 Air Miles, it's enough to get you to sign on to a website, or a high proportion of people. So rewards are pretty interesting. They are highly undervalued currency. You know, people do a lot for very little rewards in terms of real value. People will fly via, you know, Des Moines, Iowa to get to Edmonton just because they get more rewards. So I can't answer how you, but I think your idea of karma is a great one. You know, basically this is a good karma business. It's about good karma. Yeah.
Are you working with the Airmiles for Social Change folks, or Andreas, or any of those people?
No, I don't like what they're doing, actually. What they're doing is what I would call pure greenwashing. So let me give you an example. Today, the OPA, through Air Miles, will pay you if you pledge to reduce your electricity. No evidence-based measurement, hard to measure results or effectiveness. You can then take the Air Miles that you got and buy the most polluting lawnmower in history. If you look net over the life of those Air Miles, the life cycle of those Air Miles that did good, you'd probably find that the net value was negative. So you can't be half good. You can't be half pregnant in the green world. You've got to be pregnant or not pregnant. You've got to do good the whole way. And look, this is a religion more than a fact. It's not a theorem, but it's just our feeling that if you don't have evidence and you can't audit the results, if you don't have a life cycle of those points that's good, that does net good in the world, and you can prove it, then I'd rather not have those good amounts of good, because it's greenwashing. It's falsifying the notion of good. I know that this sounds, it's pretty strong, but I really feel
Go on,
this.
you're always.
I have a very definite opinion, but I really feel this very, and I might be wrong, but I can tell you more and more people are going for evidence-based stuff. You know, it wasn't long ago in Canada that evidence-based medicine was not done, or not even thought of as useful.
It's still
Today,
it's a challenge.
today it's a challenge, but it's de facto accepted.
Doctor, it's fascinating how mathematical modeling in the financial world led to your endeavors in the non-conventional energy. But how do you pivot for engagement? What was the spur for that?
First of all, what we were doing was engagement, and that was a challenge we were taking. So it was a realization that that's what we were doing. Funny as it might sound, you know, we were about this, but we hadn't sort of crystallized it. And what I always look for is what people sometimes call the white space or virgin territory. I look for problems that people haven't solved. So that was enterprise risk. No one had solved that problem. In this case, there aren't good solutions for engagement. You can't find many. There are good examples of where engagement has occurred, like smoking, for example. But they're hard to take those examples and apply them to say, climate change. So I think that this is the untapped resource. 40% of the building in this, the advantage in this building is engagement. 40% of the miles per gallon that we use in a car is engagement. And, you know, if we don't crack that, we won't crack climate change. If we don't change behavior, we won't change. We won't be able to deal with the climate change.
And what would be your role model in rewards and engagement process? Is it Emails or?
I think Emails is a very good role model for how to run a, we've got one big advantage over that, which is we actually have software that can manage engagements. Emails is a broker. But we not only have we inherited this because of where we came from. Not only do we have the points, but we have the tools that enable you to run the engagement process. So we actually have a product that would help a bank run its 100 different engagements in one architecture and have one currency for green or one currency for good. So we're looking for that single currency for good. That's what this is meant to be.
Is there a last question from
I want to ask a question, yeah. It's been fascinating hearing you. How much of this message that is being, well, you obviously have been involved and interested in this for a long time.
Yeah.
It's not something that's happened in the last couple of years or whatever. How much of this have you been able to, or do you think, not just you personally, but generally, people who are focused in your direction, permeated the rest of the world? Because it does not seem to be in so much focus or so much strength or even in thought. From
Well, you know,
what I know, in much of the Eastern world, let's say.
Well, to give you an example, one of the things I wish I could convey and actually get across, I'm still hoping to do it one day.
I mean, I'm originally from India, right?
Yeah.
So I'm talking about east of Egypt.
Yeah, what's the question?
The question is this message. You don't hear about it. People don't think it. It doesn't happen around you.
Okay.
So,
I mean,
why?
The basic story is just like 100 years ago, statistics wasn't taught in every subject, and you didn't use statistics in every subject. And today, it's in everything you see, and it's a natural part of our language. Risk thinking is not a natural part of our language. Our government makes decisions every day that contradict what I was talking about, that solve deterministic problems, stochastic problems, deterministic solutions. Simple things like that. So you think, and it's very interesting. I've given that exact talk that I gave you now at the Fields Institute to preeminent mathematicians in the room. That's all, which was the exact same science. And one of the guys from Princeton who was in the room, a professor that I admire a lot, got up and said, for the first time, I've seen someone describe this kind of thinking in a way that's understandable. Because, I mean, he teaches it every day. So one of my biggest goals in life is actually to get people to think like a risk manager. Risk thinking, get that idea out. They're simple ideas, actually. And you don't have to know a lot about technology. So anyway, this is a pet subject of mine that you touched on. Thank you.
Is there any other question from the panel or Dr. Ramos before we close? Yeah.
One last question, if that's okay. I was just wondering, how do you determine what activities are worthy of a reward? I would imagine it can get pretty murky and gray, where how you kind of break it down and say, okay, this activity has a minimal environmental footprint, and so it qualifies as a.
I have a simple filter. If this activity is done, is the world in net better off once it's done, or versus not doing it? So that's why I say, if we got everybody walks 30 minutes a day, I think the world would be better off. If we got people to reduce their energy usage, the world would be better off. If we got people to measure their heart, use their heart monitors more often, the world would be better off. So that filter, it's just, can you justifiably say the world would be better off if this activity was done?
There is a last question, okay.
Just to follow up on her question, how do you assign value to each activity? Like how does it, we know that running is better than walking, and running really fast is better than so how do you assign a reward?
Yeah, that's related to the question earlier. The answer is whatever you can get people to fund today. In other words, we would like to assign more, say, to expensive exercise than simple exercise, or more to reducing more. So it's simply we do, it's whatever works. I wish there was, once, I think if a currency like this ever got established, so there was a single currency for these points, I think a market might determine what those rewards should be. The society in some sense will pay a lot. It's just like congestion pricing on the 407. When it gets very congested, you would pay a lot to get people off the road. When we had a real problem with the hydro recently, we were paying $1.70 a kilowatt hour if we did not use electricity. So in the same way, if we have tons and tons of people dying of heart attacks and we're spending 70% of our health budget on heart attacks, then we would pay a lot to get people to measure their heart when they get out of the hospital. So it's a market-based. It's an answer.
Absolutely wonderful presentation.